So we had some technical difficulties with our software.
Let's
Um,
I think, can anyone in the chat just write back if they see us? Then we know there's someone. Now it's fine.
All right,
At least
now
we
it's
have
fine.
one.
Excellent.
Okay, let me just go and anyway, Georges, if you can start talking about the testing, and then I'll just update the social media stuff while you do that.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. It's just very tiny.
Tiny? It should be huge.
How
about now?
It's better. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so as we were trying to say earlier, I don't know where we got cut off. Our first episode of Quarkus Insights was about testing, right? So in the meantime, obviously there have been a ton of developments since then. We have had Stuart come on and talk about continuous testing, which was like a whole feature on its own, which we're not going to address here today. I definitely recommend you a search for the Quarkus Insight episode on continuous testing, though, where Stuart demonstrates this amazing feature. So we're just going to focus here on today's episode. We're going to focus on a few other things, a few other changes that have been made to, or like actually like features that we have in Quarkus testing that didn't exist when we did the previous episodes, and we haven't really addressed them in any other episodes. So let's get started, basically, unless we have any questions, which I kind of doubt we do already, right?
Not yet.
Okay, cool. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Quarkus integration test. So Quarkus integration test, let's see where it is in our documentation. Quarkus integration test. Here it is. It's in our documentation. We have in our testing guide, we have something called a section for the Quarkus integration test. And basically what this is it's a replacement for what we used to use with the native image test. So like from day one, Quarkus had this ability to launch the native binary that's created by Gradle VM and basically test it as a black box, right? So that meant that that Quarkus simply launched the binary and executed like HTTP tests or network tests, basically against the application without being able to alter the application itself. So that's a very, very important distinction we should make about the various Quarkus tests, right? Okay, so the default test, which is the Quarkus test, which is basic Quarkus test, right, is a white box test, let's say, which means that the test itself can alter the application, right? So that means like it can change CDI beans, it can interact with a CDI container, it can do all change configuration, do all sorts of things like that, right?
Yeah,
so that means that
you can do it via API, right? It can
yes,
change.
exactly.
You don't have to set up external files and stuff. You can just set it up.
Exactly. You can do that programmatically, right? So there's APIs, there's various annotations, things like that we have, which gives the ability for the Quarkus test to change the application itself. Now that is hugely beneficial when it comes to writing most test scenarios, right? Because if you didn't have this ability, you'd have to you'd have to set up like potentially you have to set up a whole bunch of Maven profiles or things like that just to test certain situations, which definitely is not fun. So Quarkus test does all the magic for you. It can it can inject mocks, for example, for the REST client, which we had shown on the first episode, I'm pretty sure. So that's like the way we see it. Most of your tests will be written with the Quarkus test, right? But once you're done with that and you've tested like the most of the functionality of the application using the Quarkus test, then what you probably want to do is you want to ensure that you have at least some testing of the actual production application that you will be shipping to production, right? Because in production, you're not going to ship an application that contains a whole bunch of testing things in it. What you're going to do is you're going to ship either a jar or a container or a native binary or a container with a native binary, whatever. And that will be executed on the target platform, Kubernetes or OpenShift, whatever. And that'll be executed as like a black box application, or just like any other application. And the way you want to test that is the way that users actually interact with that application, which is basically via the network. So either like a REST APIs or messaging APIs, things like that. So what the Quarkus integration test does is basically it launches the application, whatever type of application you've created, and it allows you. It launches the application and it allows you to interact with that application, and it waits until your tests are done and then tears down the application. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's actually a superset of what we had with the native image test, where the native image test all that could do was it was able to launch the native binary had you created one and execute the test against it. So that's a whole bunch of information, but let's see what this actually looks like in practice, right? So I'll start with a super simple application here.
So basically, you can do the same kind of testing you do with Quarkus native image test, but now you just don't have to wait for the native image builds. So
basically, yeah, you don't need the native image. You can test if you're building a jar, you can test the jar. Like a fast jar, you test a fast jar. If you're building a container, you launch the container. And that's what I'll show right here. So let's start with like a super simple application. Let's say I'll just do like a greeting endpoint. I have this Hibernate stuff for the next part I want to show. So let's not focus on Hibernate for now. Just JAX-RS with the RestEasy Reactive. Let's say greeting, and we're going to say public string hello, return hello, and we're going to say get, right? So then I go and create a test for this, a regular Quarkus test would be void test hello, test, and I'm going to use RestAssured because that's the preferred testing HTTP API. We promote, let's say, in Quarkus. So when get greeting, then status code 200 body is equal to, I think, equals, does that exist? Yes. No.
While you're timing, just saying, anyone who have questions, just put your comment in the chat, and we will ask away.
Equal to hello. Let's see, okay, so if I do this, hopefully this will work. Just absolute minimum Quarkus test. So it launches Quarkus, hits this super simple endpoint, and ensures that this is hello, right? So obviously, if I were to, let's say, like package this application, ambient package, the skip tests, and then launch it, because I'm just launching the application as a jar here. I'm not creating a container or anything. What I would do is Quarkus run Java minus jar. So that works, obviously. And if I do like 8080, hello, sorry, greeting, I'll get hello, obviously. So that, let's say this is like the simulation of what would be running in production, right? So in production, what I do want to test in this case is in my like integration test is I want to make sure that this thing actually, when this thing runs, it actually runs the application properly, and I can get the I can interact with the REST endpoint. So what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and I'll create a greeting IT. So IT is integration test. This is a Maven convention, let's say. So what Maven does is that all tests that end with test are run with the Maven Surefire plugin, which is defined here. And the Surefire plugin is like to run these regular unit tests, let's say. Integration tests for Maven are tests that actually exercise the packaged the result of the packaging operation. So MVN package creates a jar in this case, and the integration test, what it's supposed to do is actually test this. So what that means is that these tests don't run on MVN test, but they run on the verify phase, which comes after the package phase. So
yeah, so they're built at the same time but run after the packaging.
yes, it's compiled exactly. In this case, the greeting IT is compiled at the test compile phase, but it's actually run on the verify phase.
Yeah.
So I'll say Quarkus integration test, and I'll just extend the greeting resource test here. I'll call this greeting resource test. IT, sorry. I'm just extending it here because I'm not going to be doing anything different. So let's go and say MVN verify. Let's see what this does. What I'm hoping it'll do is that after the package phase has been run, so Quarkus has been built, which happened here, Quarkus augmentation completed, blah, blah, blah. And now the integration test ran. And what it does for me basically is that I see that it executed this command, right? This is the command I wanted to see. So it runs Java. It starts the application on the 8081 port, which is the same as the Quarkus test. And well, it has a bunch of properties here because I have Hibernate on the class path, but we can just skip those. Well, actually, I'll go ahead and remove those. I'll remove that too, so we can see that how much easier.
And and just while you're doing it, just because I know Eric is jumping in C for this, because he's like, did you run this without moving the failsafe config out of the native profile? Does this just work?
No, I did move it. I did move it.
Yeah, and that's an issue we have now, which I think we need to resolve. Is that to run this, you have to enable.
Yes, right. So basically, when a project is created from code.quarkus.io, the failsafe plugin is only enabled for the native profile, right?
Yeah.
So it would normally be here. What I did is I took it out of here and I put it into the regular build, which means that it's enabled for all builds, not only when I enable the native profile. So that means that now I executed it. I did again MVN verify, and what I see is that when this test runs, greeting resource IT, what happens is this gets executed. Java, blah, 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 target, blah, blah, and all this setup. And it starts the jar that I actually built in the package phase, right?
Yeah.
So this is the actual production application that would be deployed. I am testing against that, right? And that's the whole point of this Quarkus integration test. Now you're probably thinking, "Wow, yeah, this it's not too fancy or anything," but the magic, or let's say the beauty of this test, is that I can simply change, let's say, the type of artifact that I'm producing. So I'm going to create a container out of the application with our jib extension. I'm going to go MVN verify Quarkus container image build equals true. And now what I'm going to see is that Quarkus, after it builds the container image, what it's going to do when launching the test is that it's going to launch the container itself instead of the jar, right? Because I said that
Okay.
my final artifact is a container and not the not the jar.
And you not by that's the dependency is one thing, but it was a flag on the command that enables it, I assume.
Yes, so I added the dependency. I added the gib dependency, which allows a Quarkus to build a container image. But the mere presence of this dependency doesn't result in Quarkus building a container. You have to explicitly opt into that with
Yeah.
this flag, which is Quarkus container image build true. So when you do that, then we can see from the output here is that Quarkus builds a container from the jar that was created before, and
Yeah.
once that's done, you create the container image. So this is the default since I haven't changed any of the defaults. It uses some default settings, and then when we launch the test, creating source IT, what it does is that it just executes Docker run, right?
Yeah. And what if so this and this is I think this is what Eric is because he would like this to be enabled by default, but the problem is that if you do this, then Quarkus native image test will also be enabled, which would then force a build of native, right? And that's where things get
Not necessarily. No,
yeah.
because no, that won't be that's not the problem because let's say I moved it. I did move it actually. Okay, I moved this failsafe plugin from the native profile. I just moved to the build and I executed verify. That does not create a native binary, right? In
Yeah.
order to get the native binary, I have to opt in to the native profile.
And does
So in
this
this
work
case, mhm,
and this does Quarkus integration test still work with will it use the native here?
that's what I'm doing. Yeah, that's what I'm doing
Ah,
now.
okay.
So what I did now is that I executed again MV and verify with the native profile. So it's building the native binary. It should be done in a few seconds.
Cool.
And once it's done, then the test launches. The test will launch the native binary. Yes,
Yeah,
that's the whole point. So we
cool.
see here that what it did is it executed this, right? So the whole point of this Quarkus integration test is to create a like dead simple way to execute whatever kind of artifact the application is producing.
So basically this is deprecating native image test?
Yes, exactly. So if you go
Yeah,
to native image test, we haven't deprecated it in 2.7, but 2.8 has deprecated it
yeah,
in favor of Quarkus integration test. And I think we actually even mention it here.
yeah. Yeah.
Native image test.
Yeah. So we should get our code
Yes.
generation to generate
Yeah,
the
Eric already did that. Eric already did that.
oh no, well that's the thing, it's still waiting. That the PR hasn't been moved.
Oh well, it's two different things. Okay, so what he did that has already been merged, I think, is to use the integration test, or maybe that. No, oh, okay. So I think what he did is for the quick starts. Yeah, he made the quick starts use the integration test, Quarkus integration test, but the PR that changes from native image test to Quarkus integration test hasn't been merged, or maybe it's what hasn't been merged. I think
Is
perhaps is that
is
he just
the
hasn't
fail safe.
moved the failsafe, but
Yeah,
the actual test that's generated, I think, is the the Quarkus integration test. Well, we'll see for 2.8, which the first CR should be out either tomorrow or the next day.
yeah. So,
Um, and we'll be certain, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, that it is generated instead of the native image test. So, um, what the other thing that this does, that this the native image test, native image test and Quarkus integration test do is they also work with dev services, right? So that means that if I do add Hibernate to the mix, so let's say we add Hibernate here, and I go and I add, let's say, an entity and I say entity extends panache entity. So this is Hibernate Reactive. I'm not going to go into the details now. I will later on. So let's just say we have this, and we have fruit resource path fruit public uni list fruit. Let's not get tied up in the details for now. I just want to show you that the integration test will launch the container that's needed for this to work.
Yep.
Get fruit list all.
So the dev services are hooked into the integration test.
Yes, exactly. So in
Got it.
what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say prod, and there's this import SQL, which let's say I'll enable as well. And if I do mvn verify now, oh, sorry, let's give me a fruit resource test as well. Fruit resource IT. Let's just say that what this does is test all. Let's say test all fruit. So basically, I just added a fruit. I exposed all of the fruits via this endpoint. I have a test that simply checks for the status of the endpoint, but nowhere do I say like where the URL, what the URL is, or do I start a container on my own, or do I have anything running in the background? Nothing like that. So when I launch mvn verify, what I hope to see basically is to see this test pass, because Quarkus will hopefully launch the container for me. And let's see what's going on here. So the test passed, greeting resource IT, but what we also want to see here is exactly this, that when we're running it, Quarkus using the dev services, which again we've covered in a different episode, and I think at this point, from like all the features we have, I think that this is probably my favorite feature. The dev services for me is like the real game changer. And it is hooked in to the Quarkus integration test here as well. So I don't have to specify any of my production configuration. I can just say, like, go ahead and rely on dev services for the Quarkus integration test as well. And so it just started a Postgres for me here. And in this case, I was testing the jar, so everything just worked. And we can see basically what it did by seeing the command line. So in the command line, we see that we passed Quarkus automatically, basically
So
passed in all the necessary configuration for Hibernate to work. And you're probably thinking, okay, this is pretty cool, but does it only work for jar? Because like launching a container, and if the application itself is a container, and it also needs to depend on a service that's also in a container, how's that going to work? Well, let's see.
So what mode does it run in? It's not test mode. It's production.
No, production. That's the whole point. The Quarkus integration test is production. So the application itself is production, but dev services doesn't change the application itself, right? Dev services just launches something extra and alters the environment the application is running in. So the environment in this case is these system properties that are being passed in. So the URL, the username, password, blah, blah. But that's, let's say, the easy case. The difficult case would be if the application itself is a container. So I also want to run the application as like a container, which I've built with Jib. Will this continue to work? Well, let's find out. Quarkus container image build true. And let's see what the logging output looks like.
Okay, but so that means that your production settings you have will have to be some other settings than your production settings if you're testing. Like,
Well, when you're going to production, you're not going to have the settings in here anyway, right?
Yeah.
So it's the production application, but the settings themselves are proper are for this test and nothing else, right?
Okay.
So let's say, okay, here's what we did. This time we're launching the application after we created a container. So we created a container for the application. We're launching the test, and what again, dev services kicking in, creating a Postgres, and now let's see, when we run the application under the test, the application under test, so as a container, what it does now is that it launches the application in a specific network, so a specific Docker network, let's say, and that is the same Docker network that it has been used to launch Postgres, which was our container, which was used as a dependency. And now by doing that, we can have, and passing in the proper URL, we can have our application talk to the container inside this dev services. Sorry, using dev services, we can have the application that's launched as a Docker container talk to the container, the Postgres container, which is launched by dev services. And this can also, if you're using your own, if you want to launch your own resource, like with the Quarkus lifecycle, Quarkus test resource, then again, we expose the information of the network if you need it, so you can launch your own container. So all that good stuff just works.
So, and this maybe for, because then people realize, well, what, that sounds obvious you would do this, but this is something if you didn't have this, you would set up like a Docker Compose or
yes,
some
exactly.
other thing where you have to align the properties and settings, which you still can do. Like if you have a setup, we're not breaking anything, but here we literally just all that stuff just vanishes. You don't have to do anything of it, and that's the beauty of it, is right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, all this stuff is integrated with one another, so you don't have any duplication. You don't really have to think about anything. Like you said, it just works.
Yeah. All right. So by the way, I just I got Eric on because he kept writing in the chat about the config failsafe. I thought just come on board and then you can talk about the thing. Just before we do that, I saw Jeffrey said something here. Does the data of the database launch get reset between integrations tests during the build?
So when the tests themselves, sorry, the database is launched as a container, right? But it's launched as a different container for the unit tests and the integration tests. So there's no resetting that needs to be done because it's a different container, right? So when you launch, before you launch your unit test, a container comes up from dev services. Then your unit test finish. Then that's taken down.
So it is not it is effectively reset. But what it
Effective,
does is
yes.
it starts with, so that's the...
Yes, exactly. It starts anew. So effectively, yes, it's a reset. So to put it in absolute terms, anything you do in your unit test will not affect the state of the world that the integration tests see.
And I forget, do we have, I know we talked about this, but about having, hey, we want to have a specific set, like, for example, have the database start up with some parameters so it preloads some data. Do we
Yes, you
have
can.
that?
Well, yeah, this import SQL, if I add there's some configuration property that I have to set here in production mode for this to actually work. I don't have it here.
Sure.
But yes, you can do that, and you can specify arbitrary parameters for dev services to use. Again, there's a property that I think it's like Quarkus data source dev services or something like that. Properties.
I'll just throw
Anyway,
in too, if you've got more than one integration test, then the database is not reset between integration tests. It's
sure,
the
yes.
database container is stood up and then all your integration tests run.
Yeah, then it's up to you to like do whatever you feel is best for your testing strategy. I mean, other people like reset it between each test. Other people will keep the state. So yeah, we don't enforce a policy there.
Yeah. So is there a way to forget in Maven or in the Gradle? Is there a way to have a hey, do this before every other integration test? I guess not. Because that's what you're saying. Basically, you would want to have your integration test to have a before and after to clean up.
So yeah. What that would do is, so the before all and after all, that works on a per test class basis. It's not it's not a way to run something before every single test, right? Or like after every single test. As far as I know, there isn't.
But I think you got to think about it too. An integration test, like you said, is a black box test, right? It's interacting with your system as a user would be interacting with it from the outside. So the controlling of the data, you probably don't want to do that between tests. That's what your tests are for, is to test different scenarios.
Yeah, like, but I'm assuming that what the question is about is that I want like an integration point so I can set up the world and then tear down the world once the tests are done. I'm assuming that's what. Well, but it's a valid.
But you can do it here because you could have your test have a before everything that just checks it, like
sure, yeah, absolutely.
Is the bulk data loaded? If not, then I load it, and if it is there, that's good. And in the end, you just clean up for whatever delta.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no
absolutely.
So that's good. Well, let's just get into the trouble that Eric is causing. No, he's not the cause. So and this is just be clear for people who are trying this out. Quarkus test is there in 2.7, 2.6 when it was.
Oh, it's been there for a while.
Yeah, but to use it, you have to do the failsafe config thing, right?
Well, that's not exactly true. So to use it in the exact same way that native image test was being used, you don't have to do anything, right? You just use the annotation. It'll work in the exact same way. But if you want to use it for jars or containers, then yes, you need to use this failsafe configuration.
Yeah.
Or if Eric's change, which he's going to talk about, I guess, comes in, then in that case, you won't have to do anything.
Yeah, and that's it. There's a PR waiting, and that's the thing we need to figure out before a 2.8 final goes out what we do with it. Because I don't see any downsides by doing this. If the native image is not generated unless you explicitly ask for it, then it shouldn't matter.
I think the hang-up is on the prod profile, the fact that it uses the prod profile. I mean, we have in the PR, we have a way that users would still have to opt into it. So, because if you just move it, the failsafe plugin, and you have integration tests, whenever you run Maven Verify, like Georgia showed, it'll always run your integration tests. Whether or not that's a good idea and you want to do it all the time, some people say yay, some people say no, but we want users to be able to opt into that. So by having, basically, you would just send another flag with Maven to say, yeah, I want to run that.
But I think for integration tests, right? I forgot the flag, but there is a flag.
It's skip ITs. It's called skip ITs. So we would by default set skip ITs to true, except in the native profile, and keep that as false. Yeah. So the behavior would be exactly the same as today. And if you wanted to opt in, you could opt into it.
But the integration test, no matter what we do there, will still run in prod, right?
Correct. They still run the prod profile, and that's the hang up.
But why was that why is that a hang up? That's what I'm trying to.
I don't know.
Okay. So, good.
Well, you can follow the PR. I mean, I don't want to paste it here. I don't want to get into it. It's we'll just where the hang up is.
So, so if anyone who wants to use Quarkus integration test to this Quarkus integration test today, they can. They just need to make sure when they run it to enable the failsafe plugin, or enable skip IT test false, right? That'll be the
Yeah, well, if you just move the plugin out of the native profile, it'll always run.
Yeah, got it.
So if you do that yourself, it'll always run. But what's interesting on the Gradle side with 2.8 as well, there was a PR. I didn't do this one, but I helped review it. There's actually a new. So there was no way to run Quarkus integration tests outside of building a native image because of the way Gradle does source sets and whatnot. So they introduced a new source set for integration tests and a new task. So you can just run, I forget the exact name of it. It's like Quarkus int test or something like that. But you can just run that task and you can have a new int test source set and put all your integration tests in there. That will come in 2.8 as well. But the code starts that switch like if you pick Gradle as your tool in the code start, it still uses native image test because that PR wasn't there when we did the original PR and we wanted to keep them separate.
Sure.
So it's still something we got to do.
Cool.
Okay.
That's there. Anything else you want to show?
Not for Quarkus integration test.
Well,
I have another testing feature that's it's not documented yet,
okay.
but it is used internally in Quarkus, and it has been requested by some folks on chat and on issues. They're like, so basically the question is, okay, I have Hibernate Reactive. That's great. I'm using like Hibernate Reactive, RestEasy Reactive. Cool. I'm using dev services, whatever. But you know what? In my test, I want to interact with the database from the test. How do I do that with Hibernate Reactive, right? And that is fair. That is a very fair question. And up until very recently, we did not have an answer, but now we do. And I'm gonna show that answer now, right? So let's go back to the fruit we added. We added a fruit, so we're using. Let's take it from the start. We're using Hibernate Reactive Panache, right? So Hibernate Reactive with our Panache layer, making it super easy to interact with. So I have a Hibernate Reactive Panache entity, exposing all those fruits via this this get endpoint. And for starters, what I have here is I just say like I tell Quarkus to go ahead and insert into the fruits table these two fruits, an apple and a banana. So let's get rid of all these. I don't care about them for now. And let's start with fruit test. So this is a Quarkus test. And I'll go public void test all test when get, let's say, fruit, then status code 200, and let's say I want to extract as, I'll explain what this is, list fruit. This is just boilerplate list fruit ref. Okay, and fruit.
So Jordan, so I can see at least one is saying there's a lot of artifacts on the streaming. So and I can see some here on your screen. Mm-hmm. So can you just make it a bit bigger? Then I think it might be a bit. I know you say it's big for you, but and hopefully it can be
okay. So, yeah, basically in the first version, let's say, I'm going to let Quarkus insert these fruits into the database on its own. I'm not going to do anything. So the test would be very, very simple, right? All I have to do is say, get the fruits, make sure status is 200. Okay, let's also do content type JSON. And let's say I'm going to use assert J and say assert that fruits, fruits, come on. Yes, fruits has size 2, right? Okay, so let's start with that. MVN test. And let's make sure that when I hit the fruits endpoint, I get 2 fruits, which, yeah, just works, right? That's great. But like I said, this is the case where I'm letting Quarkus handle the insertion of the fruits, and the tests themselves do not play a role in setting up the environment. But let's say I did want to do that. So I delete this. I run this again, right? Now the test should fail because there's no one populating the database. And let's make sure that happens. Oops. I need to MVN clean. Yeah, that's something that I don't really like. Wave and it doesn't. Come on, it doesn't really track the deletion. Oh, clean and test should work. I mean, it should get the test failing. Exactly. So
Yep.
assert J tells me that I expected 2 fruits from this endpoint. I got nothing. Right. So a lot of people say, okay, yeah, this is where in like the before phase or after phase, like we were talking about earlier, I want to interact with the database, right? I want to insert something in the database and make sure it's actually there before the test runs. So let's see. Normally, what you would start with basically is say, okay, inject. I'll inject mutiny session. So I'll inject the Hibernate Reactive version of a session, right? So if you know Hibernate or like JPA, JPA would be the entity manager, Hibernate would be the session. The Hibernate Reactive version is this mutiny session object. And if you go and insert a setup method, so before each, I'm setting up, and what I want to do is I want to say session persist. Let's say I want to persist a new fruit. I want to say banana.
Are you running the continuous test enabled, or are you running test?
No, that's I said that in the beginning that I don't have continuous testing enabled because I want to focus on the various steps that
Sure.
we're about to execute. Well, like I said in the beginning, continuous testing is amazing, and you should definitely check out Stuart's episode if you haven't seen that already on how Quarkus continuous testing works. So under normal circumstances, if I weren't like trying to demo this stuff, I would be running with continuous testing. I would just keep on. I'd be coding, run, and tests would be running on their own. I'd be failing and trying again, and without running all this MVN test stuff every time. So let's go and add a constructor and have another one just for Jackson. Okay, so let's say persist a banana. And let's say I thought that, okay, yeah, this is simple enough. Let's just do this, right? Well, you're probably going to guess that this won't work, right? If it were, then I wouldn't be talking about it. Okay, so basically you get this very good error message that says this method should be invoked from a Vertex event loop thread currently running on thread main. And for this thing right here, what does that mean, right? I think we've had a Hibernate Reactive session before. We've talked about it multiple times on this video series. That Hibernate Reactive can, because it's reactive and it uses reactive IO under the hood, it has to execute on a Vertex thread. So a Vertex event loop, which is just a netty event loop, means that you have to the operations you're going to perform need to be managed somehow, right? You can't just run them like here because JUnit runs tests in the main thread, right? There's no real threading model for JUnit because, like, for tests, everything is meant to be pretty much meant to be blocking, right? It doesn't. There isn't a huge um, point in having like reactive tests all the way down, right? So what we're doing here is we want to solve this problem. And what we came up with is this annotation called run on Vertex Context, right? So what does that do? the first thing it does is that it forces the execution of this it forces the execution of this method of actually the body of any method that is annotated with it on a vertex event loop. So let's see, thread current thread get name. Let's say I was system out here. Let's say I did this without. I did this. Let's make sure that we did run. This was being run on main before, and there. It's probably lost in the output here, but main right here, right? So this is main. If I do this, then I'm hopefully going to get a vertex event loop thread that running this, right? And I did vertex event loop thread 63. But however, the test still failed. So, and actually, you might have thought that this would have been 1 instead of 0, but it's not. So there's a few more pieces to the puzzle here, right?
So George, before we go on, just because there's one question here, like any specific reason why you inject mutiny session instead of a repository fruit panache? I assume this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Basically, we could have used the repository and we would get the same exact failure. I could have done, I could have said like fruit persist here, and I would have gotten the same error, right? What I did here is I'm injecting the session because I've seen a lot of the times there's this pattern where when you're trying to like test the repository, you don't want to use the repository itself in the test, but you want to go like a layer lower in order to make sure that your like repository is actually behaving properly. So if you have an error somewhere in the repository, it's not in the test and the code itself. It's only in the actual like production code. So that's the basic reason I did that here. So like I said, first step is to run on the Vertex event loop. We need to do that. But obviously, this is an async operation, right? So Hibernate Reactive is async, which means that when you return a void uni, nothing's really going to happen unless somebody subscribes to this result, to the uni, right? So as you remember, a uni is not like a completion stage, where a completion stage, like once you return it, the computation has already been started, or the operation has already been started. A uni is not, it's lazy. It only starts when someone subscribes to it. So we have to provide a way to tell the to make these operations, to make the tests basically wait for these operations to complete. So what we have here is the uni asserter. So uni asserter only works on this on methods annotated with the run on Vertex event context. And what it does is that it allows you to say like, let me execute some arbitrary command, right? And wait for, and basically make sure it does a whole lot of other things too. So it allows you to assert on things, but for now, all we need is the execute. Basically, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say persist, but I also need a session. So I can say session with transaction and T and say session persist. So let's try and make sure that if I only add one banana, that hopefully now the test will be failing, but it will be failing because it expected 2 and got 1 instead of getting 0. Let's see. Yes, excellent. So now we got 1 fruit, which means this worked. So what we can do here is that we can add another fruit. So chain session dot persist new fruit apple. Cannot resolve chain. Okay, yeah. I think I need this. I need a supplier. Yes. Okay. So now the test should pass, right? Because what I'm doing here, again, because Hibernate Reactive is async, and this is the same for any other async API that you would be using in a test, and you would be waiting for its result. You need to run it on a Vertex event loop, and you need to make sure that the result that this async API is returning, that you are waiting for that result before Quarkus, the Quarkus extension, passes the control to this method, right? Because this is deceptive, right? In a normal blocking case, when you call setup and the setup finishes, then JUnit is free to start calling the actual test methods. But that's not really the case with async APIs. You need to make sure that the result they're giving you subscribe to it and you wait till it's actually been published. There's also a way to make this a little simpler. There's let's say a sister annotation to run on a Vertex Context, which is called reactive transactional, which basically allows me to take away the transaction from here and just add the annotation instead. So in this case, I will just make it a little simpler by having the reactive transactional execute these two, persist, and we're done. And just to make absolute sure that we are doing what we think we are doing, contains exactly in any order banana and apple. And we should be good to go. Excellent. So that worked. There's one final thing I want to say here. You can get rid of this by doing Quarkus and test endpoint.
You can change the default point. Yeah. Okay.
Excuse me?
You can change the default request.
Yes, basically, when you have this annotation here, it recognizes the path from the resource and will go ahead and work. But what I do here, when get, okay, right.
And Benjamin calls the example you just gave like a weight equivalent. It's just basically ordering the thing you do. Yeah, so that works.
Right. So, like I said, this is very important. This is a very important feature for testing Hibernate Reactive applications, basically, but any other in any other case where you have to use an API, reactive API inside the test. We haven't documented it, but we will document it soon. But rest assured, this is being used inside Quarkus, so it is being tested. So it's not something like we just threw out there and hope everybody will find the bugs for us.
Hey, Jojo, a question. So reactive transactional, so those insert the records. Does that mean that those records stay inserted even when this test ends? So that's where that test reactive transaction would come in. That would wipe the transaction out.
No, it's not going to wipe them out. No, I added it here because I can't persist anything without a transaction. So if I just run this, it's not going to work.
Right.
Because there's no transaction.
So, but this doesn't clean up anything. If you use
it doesn't clean
reactive transactional, it would clean up the records after, right?
No. The whole point of reactive transactional is to be able to use your typical, let's say, annotation style programming of declaring a transaction, but actually using an async API, right? Yes, I do see what you're saying. Like we could have some other annotation that does say like test transactional or whatever, which also removes things at the end.
But we have that. That's what I'm asking.
We have that for the sync API, not the async.
No, we have test reactive transactional. It's there in the sample.
Test reactive transactional. Okay. Then that's something I don't.
Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, I've no problem. I mean, I don't know. I've never used it, but if you say it's there, then I'll check it out. But I don't.
I think it would make sense in a setup method because it would insert it and then delete it when the.
Yes, exactly.
But you would put it on a regular test method.
Well, okay, cool. I mean, I'll have to check that out. I didn't know about that one.
And then I see what he means. He said, Nido asks, this endpoint annotation only bootstrap this resource? Correct to say that startup of this test is faster? I don't know.
What this does? No. So what this does basically, it only configures RestAssured for this test class. Basically, it takes the base path. It basically does this given base path.
Yeah. So basically, instead of having, because you only have one method, it doesn't matter much here. But if you had like 10 minutes, you could just remove it and say, hey, this.
Yeah, exactly. If I had 10 different tests 10 different methods of fruit resource, and I wanted to test them all, then I would be
for now. He's asking if you had 1,000 endpoints, 1,000 resources, will this here just boot that one endpoint? I don't think so.
Well, this doesn't boot an endpoint. All it does it
configures the assertion.
Configures RestAssured, nothing more. The booting happens with Quarkus test.
Yeah. So this is not like, I think if you use like Aquilion, where you can make like a small subset to make it boot up. This is not what this does, because in Quarkus we assume things are fast. So we try and you don't want to make that thing. So no, this is just for setting up the test. It's not for setting up the bootstrap of.
Yeah, exactly. So just a quick note before we go. Our internal tests do use that like Arquillian style bootstrapping of an application, but we don't have that for regular applications. It's hard to use. We don't really envision users using it. What we do have is like the Quarkus test profile. Quarkus test, Quarkus profile. Test resource. Or is it Quarkus profile or something like that? I don't really remember what the exact name of the annotation is. Profile. Test profile. Okay, so the test profile is where you would, if you need to have like multiple different Quarkus applications started, based on your test. So each test has to have different configuration. Then this is the test profile is what you would use, and that's what would start a Quarkus application and tear down a Quarkus application.
Yeah, cool. But one thing I just want to, because you do, so we have Quarkus tests, we have Quarkus integration tests, we have Quarkus native image test. Native image test is deprecated. We just use a Quarkus. Yes. But then we also have things we also talked about in one session. I forget what it was. Is
Quarkus main test, yes.
Is Quarkus main test and Quarkus main integration test, which is used to do test of main apps. So those are not that runs as a service. It's literally just a CLI that runs. And Quarkus main test will test that in VM, so you can tweak and modify and do all the stuff you want. And Quarkus main integration test is doing the same thing here. It will either call the main like a jar or as a native compiled thing, but it'll be black box testing. So it means that with this, which I think is the same thing, was that, we have now all the different ways of combining testing covered now, at least like the most common ones. And mind you, it's all without any, there's no Docker compose, there's no setup clusters, there's no, it just kind of works.
And the overarching message is there's no reason not to write tests.
There's what, sorry?
There's no reason not to write tests.
Yes, basically, right? You can run them in full speed mode, but you can also set up some external stuff that uses other tests, whatever, and run it. But with this, you can, it's really nice. So, Eric, you said I should paste this link in. What was that one? Was that just an example of the reactive transactions?
Yeah, that's the test reactive transaction. We use it in the sample app.
Yeah.
Oh,
basically, every test method executes in the context of a reactive transaction, and then the transaction gets rolled back when the test is done.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Okay. Well, we are at the top of our hour, and we at least look at in the viewer count, we managed to get out on the right channel. Not sure what went wrong in the beginning. And we actually have, what was the next? Oh, I just remember. We actually have the Quarkus IO. This is updated, so I'm just going to check what the next one is. Newing Quarkus Kafka with Lurik, which I think actually is listening here. So next week is the March 29th, and it'll be about Kafka, as far as I can see. So that's good. Great. And Jim saying Quarkus Superheroes is a great example. So good on you, Eric. Awesome, guys.
Nice.
See you
All
around.
right.
Fun.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.